guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Danny Phantom. Okay, so this episode, Lucky in Love, reintroduces Johnny 13 and Kitty, and essentially the episode is just about, the episode's interesting because Danny winds up finally getting the girl of his dreams, only for it to be a big twist in the middle of the episode. So, yeah, that winds up being the big problem. But, in case, the episode opens up with, Danny and his friends at the Amity Falls Water Park. And while they're at the water park, we actually see Johnny 13's shadow leaned up against a sign, pretending to be Johnny 13. Its shape changed to look like him. And then we see that it is actually a shadow, which then scurries into the park. And of course everybody's excited about the being at the water park and everything like that. And of course Danny is notably uncomfortable, and he's wearing his shirt. But what we find out is that, in case in point from what we saw last episode, Walker was successful in turning everybody against Danny because there are now like news crews and everything. But in case Danny, they admit that they love the water park, but also Tucker is kind of worried about getting burned a little bit. And Sam, we find out, in addition to wearing her bathing suit, she is wearing full goth clothes. Essentially, she's wearing a goth sun hat and cape. And admits that she's not worried about burning because she doesn't burn. Goths don't burn; they simmer. But Danny merely notes that she is probably overcooked because she's wearing all black. At which point she starts smelling herself and discovers that yes, she does in fact smell, and decides to go to the washroom to freshen up. And of course it is at this point where they realize where Danny's ghost sense goes off, and it's at this point where Johnny 13's shadow starts terrorizing the park. And of course, Danny immediately tries to find an appropriate place to go ghost. He immediately runs off. Immediately, the first thing he does is run off to the bathroom, but he accidentally runs into the girls' bathroom where we are introduced to Paulina's friend Star. But essentially, Paulina and Star kind of make fun of him for wandering into the girls' bathroom by accident. So he immediately slinks off to go hide behind the Amity Falls, attraction sign, all the places you can go, the little map that shows you where everything is in the water parks and things like that. One of those. But in case he proceeds to go ghost and proceeds to fight. He proceeds to fight Johnny 13's shadow, and he asks and he then proceeds to call it a series of names, and then asks it if it remembers him. And the shadow then proceeds to respond to that by immediately knocking Danny through several attractions and other things, and Danny realizes that that's an unresounding yes. At which point he proceeds to fight the shadow by essentially doing a nosedive into one of the pools at the water park, which causes the shadow to become stuck because Danny points out that he knows that water hurts it, but he's also curious if he's also very curious if water will diffuse it in any way. And of course it works, and he winds up using the emergency drain system to flush it, and he tells it to have fun in the sewers before turning back into his human mode. But with one major complication. Paulina sees him transform back into his human form, and now knows his secret, which And of course, it's at this point where Danny proceeds to run off to go find Sam and Tucker, because obviously that's a big problem. And of course, in the process, we find out that again, in keeping with last episode, Walker was successful in turning out public opinion against Danny, because we see a news person there who is currently commenting about the latest attack from what we find out is what people have collectively decided to call Danny Invisibill, which of course, Danny immediately comes to Tucker and Sam and tells them that they got a problem, and Tucker just sarcastically remarks about the whole, the fact that Danny's ghost name is now being referred to as Invisibill, and that Danny needs a publicist. But Danny points out that it's worse than just his public image. He points out that Paulina saw him change, and he points out that she knows now. And But Sam then proceeds to point out that she doesn't really want to hear the name Paulina because, as she points out, she had a very interesting encounter with Paulina in the bathroom. And visibly does not like her very much. But of course, before she can finish her statement, Paulina then proceeds to call to Sam and Tucker. And also to Sam and Danny. She refers to Tucker as the other guy, but she immediately greets them, and Sam, of course, comes to confronts Paulina, telling her that she doesn't know what she thought she saw, but that she should very well leave Danny alone and just forget everything that happened. But it's at this point where Paulina remarks that it's no big deal and that they can trust her, and with Danny kind of questioning as to how and Tucker to also as well trusting how they can possibly trust her, pointing out that obviously he thinks that she might gossip because that's what Paulina is kind of known for. Paulina points out that knowing Danny's secret makes it their secret, quote unquote, which of course she implies in a romantic context, and does ask Danny if he would like to. Like to go out sometime, which Danny is kind of head over heels about and kind of accepts, but of course she points out that it's great and that she'll see him later, and it's of course at this point where Danny is a little confused as to what happened, but isn't really complaining, because that means that he and Paulina are kind of a thing now, which has kind of been what Danny's wanted the entire time up until this point. But in any case, this of course causes problems at school though, because the very next day, he thinks everybody's staring at him, obviously, because they've heard that about the rumors about Paulina, and it's spread throughout the school that she's supposedly dating Danny. And Danny admits that he kind of likes the attention, but also doesn't, because he doesn't like the fact that everybody's staring at him. But Tucker points out that he should really learn to accept it, because popularity is popularity, and he's probably going to be, and that as long as he and Paulina are going out, it's probably going to persist that way. But it's at this point where Tucker then proceeds to go and get a drink from the water fountain, and in the process, Johnny's shadow bursts out of it. Which of course causes Sam to sarcastically to remark that that's most likely that seems to be where all the water from the sewer went, and the implication of that's kind of gross. But of course, Danny immediately looks for someone to hide, even though he admits he's in front of a lot of different people. But Paulina then proceeds to cover for him, and it's coming out of nowhere to cover for him, and he immediately goes ghost and faces off against the shadow in the middle of their school, and eventually Danny is able to successfully chase the shadow off. He admits that he's able to scare the shadow off and get to return to go back to where it came, and this of course causes and after returning back to his human form by hiding in a locker. Paulina then proceeds to point out that he should really consider that she really doesn't need to hide who he is anymore, pointing out that he can open up and say it. At which point she proceeds to tell the entire school that she and Danny are dating, which of course shocks a lot of people who are very visibly surprised, and of course, at lunch, Danny winds up being a little bit confused because of what's going on. But he winds up sitting down at the table, and he winds up sitting down at the popular kids table, which he has never done, and he is very visibly confused. But Paulina explains that that's kind of the fringe benefits of dating her, because Paulina is popular, Danny is popular by association, which means that now everybody is full of envy for him, and also now wants to be him. Which means which means that he's now popular for that reason. And of course, meanwhile, Dash then proceeds to come up to Danny and admits that he's confused, that he's also admittedly a little confused as to how it happened. He admits that since he and Paulina are dating now, that means that Danny is officially one of the guys, as he puts it, So he proceeds to give Danny. We then proceed to find out there's a bunch of rituals about popularity and stuff like that, including he gets a dossier on all the things that make on all things cool. He's introduced to a kid named Mikey who is established to do the popular kids' homework and works with alongside them. He's not a popular kid by association, but he does work for the popular kids as established in the episode. And but of course. And then, of course, we also find out that the popular kids apparently also get a hall pass that earns them a free frozen yogurt if they get it stamped 10 times, which, of course, causes Danny to realize that he's one of the guys now. But it's at this point where Dash also kind of goes on instinct and accidentally makes fun of him, but then realizes that since Danny's popular now, he's not supposed to do that, so he corrects himself and calls him Pal instead, which, of course, Danny is not really sure how he's supposed to feel about it, but he's obviously happy that he's no longer being picked on anymore, which of course is a good problem to have, but still a problem. But meanwhile, Quan then proceeds to remark that he didn't think they had room for more members, and it's at this point where Dash then proceeds to tell him the bad news. And what we find out is that Quan now has to sit with what is it? He now has to sit with Tucker and Sam, and remarks that since he was on the bubble and has been effectively been kicked out, so he's not allowed to be popular anymore, unfortunately for him. So unfortunately, because of that, he's kind of stuck and screwed. But in any case, this winds up resulting in a montage of sorts, where Danny, happy about the fact that he now has a girlfriend, then proceeds to go on a montage of dates where he takes her out on romantic walks in the park, takes her on a picnic side date, even beats up the Box Ghost for good measure, who just shows up as a cameo in this episode at one point. And meanwhile, Quan is now hanging out with his two new best friends in an identical montage, which is hilarious and funny and all. It's just hilarious, being perfectly honest. Just, it's the romantic date thing with obviously with Danny and Paulina. That makes sense. But then it does the exact same montage in the exact same way with Quan, and that's funny as hell. But in case at this point where obviously Tucker points out that obviously they need to do something about Quan, since Quan has obviously been hanging out with them and being best friends with them for the longest time. But Tucker, of course, then realizes that he also has found a benefit to the fact that Danny is dating Paulina and isn't able to hang out with them anymore. As he finds out, and this is where we officially learn Star's name. But we find out is that, as Tucker refers to it, he realizes that now that Paulina is popular and has Danny, we now find out that Star and her are to an extent no longer friends. We find out that she normally is considered, that Paulina's satellite friend, as Tucker puts it. So since he points out that she's no longer orbiting Paulina, again as he puts it, that means he has a chance at her. So, and decides that the best way to do that is to just let Sam be with Quan for a bit, which Sam openly objects to, but of course Tucker immediately leaves her alone with Quan to go and talk to Star, who immediately jumps at the opportunity for Tucker to be her boyfriend. She immediately starts making demands of him to hold her stuff and walk her to class and a whole bunch of other things. And Tucker is initially happy by this. He admits that it's worth it. So he is very happy that he gets to have Star as his girlfriend for a bit as well. So he immediately leaves with her. Meanwhile, Quan excitedly comes up to Sam, but also has since picked up on the fact that Sam and Tucker don't really like him very much. He openly admits that. He knows they don't like him very much, but he has been enjoying hanging out with them, and he admits that. But and Sam, kind of filled with pity for him, does remark that he would very much love to go out on a quote unquote pity date with him, with pointing out that she wants to take him to a goth poetry slam that she goes to, and He admits that, and he admits that and she openly admits that it's not really a date, but it'll be full of plenty of pity. But Quan does pull her into a hug, admitting that he's more than happy to go with her. But yeah, and this is what I said about Quan. Quan is the nicest popular kid. When he's not being influenced by the other kids, when he's not being pushed onto the pedestal of being popular, he's a pretty nice guy overall. He's like, I do like Quan. Not necessarily the other popular kids, but they take a while to get to the point where they're supposed to be, likable. But Quan from like his first appearance or so, from like his first major appearance or so, has pretty much been one of the nicer ones. So I do like him. But in cases at this point where Sam and Quan do proceed to go to the poetry slam, and they do listen to some poetry for a bit, which is obviously about what you'd expect. It's dark, gloomy poetry, those kinds of things. But it's at this point where Quan then proceeds to go up and reveal that he wrote his own poem, with Sam only watching in sheer embarrassment as Quan basically just recites something that is not socially acceptable in a goth setting, and he proceeds to get them both kicked out, with Quan apologizing that he ruined their evening, with Sam being just frustrated with him. But meanwhile, Danny is still very much enjoying his time with Paulina. He at one point goes on a date with her to the bowling alley, and what we find out is that Paulina cannot bowl to save her life, which of course winds up being a major moral conflict here. She then proceeds to ask Danny if she could do something to help her out with Bolt being able to bowl straight, and of course he points out that that's cheating, but she remarks that it's not so much cheating as it is improving her average at bowling. So Danny, realizing he can't really say no to Paulina, does decide to quote unquote excuse himself and admits that he'll be back just in time to watch her score a bowl. And with that, he then proceeds to go to the bathroom, change into his ghost mode, and then proceeds to use his intangibility to guide Paulina's ball through the center of the lane to the pins where it gets bowled over. Paulina is very visibly happy, and is very visibly happy that she got a strike, even though Danny helped her a little bit. But shortly after she gets a strike, Johnny's shadow once again emerges from the bowling alley and starts to terrorize Danny again. And of course, Danny immediately shifts to his ghost mode to fight back against the shadow. Meanwhile, Tucker is similarly there, and he's on a date with Star, who is admittedly very demanding, and he has started to pick up on that. But he sees Danny fighting the shadow and does break off his date pretty briefly to help. So of course Danny proceeds to fight off the shadow, and Tucker proceeds to use a bright light from the roof to destroy it, so that if Danny can resume his date. And of course Paulina sees Danny defeat the shadow and is very visibly happy that she then pointing out that she has the best boyfriend in the world, and she proceeds to lean in for a kiss, with Danny remarking that he must be the luckiest guy in the world. At which point we find out the twist. And it's because it's this point where Johnny 13 makes his first appearance in this episode, and then tells Danny to step away from his girl. It's at this point where we find out the twist. The reason Paulina's been acting so nice to Danny is because she's possessed by Johnny's girlfriend Kitty, and she tells Johnny to back off, pointing out that she's Danny's girl now. And this of course causes Danny to immediately realize that he's in a bit of a pickle, because he just found himself in the middle of a love quadrangle where he is in love with Paulina. Paulina is possessed by Kitty, and Kitty is trying to make Johnny jealous, and of course Johnny is very visibly angry at Danny, remarking that he doesn't really want any trouble, But of course, since he obviously points out that Danny has already earned quite a bit of trouble, then proceeds to get into a fight with him again to kind of fight over them for Kitty's affections. And Danny, of course, tries to fight, does chase Johnny around the city for a bit as they fight, and of course, Danny is eventually able to fight off Johnny and dispel his shadow, and is able to keeps Kitty safe from Johnny for the time being, but and also Paulina by extension of that. But he then proceeds to point. But of course, Johnny remarks that he may have won for now, but does admit that he'll be back. At which point, he uses a special device, which is revealed that he stole from Fenton Works, to create his own ghost portal and go back into the ghost zone. And this, of course, causes Danny to become very visibly confused, since this is the first time Johnny's been able to do that. But it's at this point where Kitty explains that since Johnny was last there, he stole something from his parents' lab, and it does admit that does proceed to try and once again lean in for a kiss with Danny, but Danny then proceeds to point out that he's not going to kiss her because he's got something far more important that they need to talk about. At which point, he brings her back to he uses his ghost powers to bring her back to the Fenton Works, and then asks her to tell him exactly what's been going on. And it's this point where Kitty proceeds to explain exactly what happened. Obviously, she's already explained how Johnny gained the ability to make his own ghost portals by stealing a little device from Fenton Works and incorporating it into his bike. But which also means that Johnny was able to come to and from the human world as pretty much as many times as he wanted. And Kitty proceeded to ask him to take her with, and of course they did, and it was kind of a bit of a romantic thing for a while. But what we find out is that Johnny, in keeping with his little bad boy lowlife energy that he puts off, couldn't help but stare at some of the girls that he saw as he kept leaving the ghost zone and going on a date with Kitty, and eventually Kitty just kind of got sick of him staring at other women, so he left, and immediately Johnny, of course, responded by sending his shadow after Kitty. At which point Doug starts off with what the conflict of the episode originally was. Kitty fled to the bathroom to try and find a vessel because he knew that Danny and Johnny butted heads sometimes. So in order to make Johnny jealous, she decided to find someone to, date Danny with, and she admits that she initially wanted to possess Sam. She admits that she kind of understands that Sam and Danny kind of have feelings for each other and haven't really admitted to them yet. And Danny, of course, doesn't deny this. He merely just stumbles over his words for a few minutes before telling her to keep going. At which point she explains that she also knew that Danny liked Paulina, so she possessed Paulina, and from that point onward, Paulina became her vessel. And of course, Kitty doesn't seem to see the problem with any of this, pointing out that everybody seems to benefit from this. Obviously, Danny gets to be popular. He gets to have a girlfriend, while she gets to make Johnny jealous, and admits that everybody wins. But Danny, of course, points out that there is one person who doesn't win in this scenario: Paulina. He admits that Paulina is essentially being used as a puppet and is unwillingly being forced to date Danny against her will. So he admits that that's not great, and that Kitty needs to leave Paulina alone. And but of course, Kitty then proceeds to point out that she doesn't think she will, and also admits that she knows that Danny was probably going to say something like that. So she proceeds to give him an ultimatum: either continue to date her and make Johnny jealous, or she'll make Paulina expose Danny's secret in front of the entire school. And Danny, realizing he doesn't really have much of a choice, decides to initially go along with that. So at which point Paulina leaves, telling Danny that he'll see her boyfriend later. Which of course Danny realizes he's in a bit of a pickle. But of course, meanwhile, Danny is kind of pacing to himself about all of this. He admits that he kind of meets with them he meets with Sam and Tucker. He meets with Sam and Tucker at the Nasty Burger and explains what's going on about how how he's having trouble with Johnny and Kitty and admits that Paulina as a result is kind of smothering him and admits that Kitty is extremely high maintenance because of that. And he realizes that the best way, and of course, Sam gives him an "I told you so," pointing out that he could tell from that Paulina would be high maintenance. But he then proceeds to explain how he needs to find a way to get Kitty and Johnny back together to get both of them out of his hair. And of course, at this point where Sam then proceeds to tell Kitty tells Danny that if he wants to appeal to Johnny, then he should play it close to the vest and go persuade to Johnny to take Kitty back in some way. And Danny does kind of take her advice to heart, but also demonstrates that he's a lot more desperate and does not in fact go play it very close to the vest. And he does kind of come to Johnny begging him to take Kitty back, but of course. Well, and Johnny, of course, admits that he would love to take Kitty back, but he doesn't even know why she would want him. So he admits that he feels like that he doesn't deserve her because he's hurt her one too many times. But it's this point where Danny then realizes that he has a good idea of how to get Kitty to realize her feelings for Johnny. At which point he tells Johnny a plan, and meanwhile. And this is a scene that isn't really, but I don't really know where to put this. But there is a scene where Tucker, of course, is currently holding things for Star and is visibly frustrated. And again, she goes leaves to sit down while Sam then proceeds to kind of leave Quantum because of course he's also proceeding to smother her as well. At which point they both vent to each other at the same time that their respective parties are frustrating to deal with, and she wishes they would leave them alone. And this of course realizing that they should very much work together, realize that they need to figure something out. But as they find out, the problem essentially works itself out. So as it turns out, Paulina, since they're both sitting in like the booths next to each other, Quan and Star wind up talking with each other, and the end result of that is that they both decide to kind of break it off with their respective friends, and decide to start dating together, pointing out that they're more popular than the two of them combined. And do tell them that they're sorry it didn't work out the way they were hoping, but that they're hoping that they can at least still be friends. And of course, Sam and Tucker immediately take the opportunity to just kind of ditch them and leave, with Quan and Star remarking that seemed to have gone well. But in any case, it is at this point where we see the end of the episode, where of course Danny is on a date with quote-unquote Paulina, which and of course we then find out that Danny then proceeds to remark his big plan, to put his big plan in action, which is to essentially make Johnny look like the victim, so that Kitty goes back to him. And of course, case in point, he proceeds to tell her about how he essentially straightened Johnny out, pointing out that he knows Kitty is worried about Johnny getting jealous of him again, but points out that if Johnny were to come back and try to fight for her affections again, he could take him and probably knock him out. And of course, it's at this point where Johnny then proceeds to appear, telling Danny to put his money where his mouth is. At which point the two proceed to have a quote-unquote fake fight, where the punches are very much real, but both Danny and John, and of course Johnny is very visibly frustrated with Danny when he accidentally bonks him on the nose. But of course it's at this point where Danny proceeds to tell Johnny to just pretend it hurt. So, pretend it didn't hurt. At which point they just, kind of pull their own weight, just kind of pull their punches a little bit, making it very clear that they're not actually fighting, while at the same time kind of sort of actually fighting. And eventually Johnny loses the fight essentially, and is quote unquote pinned down by Danny. And with Johnny remarking that Danny was always better than him and ultimately beat him once again. As this point where Danny then proceeds to make a big play of playing to get rid of Johnny once and for all, uses his Ghost Ray to do it. And of course Kitty immediately sees this entire fight, and realizing that Johnny is probably about to die, cemented by the fact that Johnny gives her his last quote unquote last farewell, admitting that Danny was ultimately the better man, and that she's sorry that it has to end this way. But Kitty at this point realizes that Johnny means a lot more to her than she was thinking, and does proceed to shove Danny off of Johnny, telling him that if he touches a single hair on his greasy head, that she will ultimately make sure that Danny shares the same fate. And of course, Johnny takes offense to the fact that she called him greasy, but she does return to sentiment, realizing that she's happy they're no longer fighting. And of course, Danny then proceeds to remark that he's happy all things worked out between the two of them, pointing out that they're essentially made for each other. And of course, Johnny does thank Danny for helping fix the relationship problems, and then proceeds to return to the ghost zone. But Danny, of course, then proceeds to follow him into the portal Johnny just created, because he still has one last piece of business, which is to destroy the device that Johnny built into his bike to keep them from coming back without his say-so. And Johnny is, of course, visibly annoyed, pointing out that wasn't part of the deal, which, of course, gets him in trouble with Kitty, who immediately hears him say this, and realizes that there was something else going on. And Johnny can only really respond with an crud, because he realizes he's been caught. But in any case, Danny proceeds to emerge out of the portal as it's closing, at which point he comforts the now overshadowed Paulina, who is obviously very visibly confused, and he then proceeds to ask Paulina in his ghost mode if she of course knows who he is, and she responds that she does know who he is, pointing out that he's the ghost boy who saved her twice now, as she puts it, and satisfied with the fact that she no longer knows his dual identity, he proceeds to leave, but she does thank him as he leaves for saving her. And then we find out that Paulina has also seemingly developed feelings for Danny Phantom, specifically because this is the big shakeup of the episode. Paulina is still in love with Danny, but she's in love with the wrong Danny. And of course, Danny proceeds to remark this exact sentiment. So, yeah, and he admits the point, and he does point out that he's just happy everything all worked out for the best. But it's this point where Dash and Quan show up, and do point out that since Danny is no longer popular and is no longer dating Paulina, that they're going to need all of his membership stuff for the popular kids table back, so that they can reinstate Quan. And with Quan just remarking that they'll likely have to beat him up after school to get it back if he doesn't give it back by lunch. But in any case, Danny of course remarks that he's just glad everything's back to normal. While of course we find out that Tucker remarks that that apparently Danny got through 9 punches on his he was 1 punch away from finishing his stamp collection for his free yogurt, and does remark that that's unfortunate that he wasn't able to finish it. But it's this point where he sees Mikey walk past, and Tucker says hi to him. But ironically enough, as the episode ends, Mike tells them not to talk to him, pointing out that they're not nearly cool enough, which is what Dash said to him when he was first introduced. So yeah. It's essentially the episode. As I said in my previous review of Johnny 13 and his character, Johnny's the most neutral, is probably Danny's most neutral villain. As in this episode, he was only trying to fight Danny because Danny was unwittingly dating Kitty, and obviously wanted his girl back. So of course was very frustrated that obviously Danny was unwittingly making him jealous. So, obviously Danny found himself in the middle of a lover's quarrel. That's essentially what the episode was. But Danny ultimately works it out, and if they leave on mostly amicable terms. Obviously, Johnny was pissed off at Danny for breaking his little device that let him go in and out of the ghost zone. But, overall, Johnny is not a bad person. He does get along with Danny at the best of times, which I do kind of like. It's interesting. We don't see many. It's rare to see villains getting along with their heroes. And I do like that Johnny is essentially this world's equivalent of that. Because, obviously, we've already established, Johnny's not a bad person. He just wants to make his girlfriend happy, and obviously, the big conflict of the episode is that he accidentally made her jealous, and she decided to get revenge. So, you know, yeah, of course, that's just what the episode wants, but there is a major shakeup going on after this episode, which is that, you know, Danny, of course, Paulina, of course, is now in love with Danny's superhero self, and that very much, and there's a lot, I haven't talked about this much, there's a lot of mirroring between Danny Phantom specifically and a lot of shows that it's obviously remixing a lot of different shows and a lot of different superhero stories and other things to make its kind of make its characters and story work. Paulina is essentially the Lois Lane of this series because early on, if I remember correctly, Lois was in love with Superman, but only with his superhero self, and that is essentially what Paulina's character is. She is in love. She is, you know, the obviously attractive woman that Danny wants, but she's only in love with him as his superhero alter ego. So, you know, that winds up being the premise of her character from this point onward, if I remember correctly. But you know, it's overall a pretty great episode. I do enjoy it, but yeah, it's just a fun episode, and obviously the major shakeup with this episode is that now Paulina didn't wind up learning Danny's secret identity, as it turns out, but she did wind up figuring out that Danny is a good person, that Danny Phantom is a hero and not the evil monster that the media is now trying to make him out to be, as per Walker's playing previous episode, and now is in love with him. So, you know, it's kind of cute, but yeah, in any case, that is going to do it for today's episode review. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of perks that are my way of saying thanks, so please go check this out. Also, be sure to go and check out my Discord. Link is down in the description. We're going to be doing a movie watch-along thing at the end of the month, so I hope you guys will be joining along with that. That'll be probably either Saturday or Sunday. I still haven't decided, but it's going to be that weekend, that Halloween weekend. Probably leaning towards Sunday, but it's probably going to be that Sunday before Halloween. So, yeah, go check that out. I may or may not have a plan on what I want the movie to be, but you know, we'll see. But also be sure to go and check out my Twitter to a lesser extent. Elon is changing way too many things that he really weren't broken. He's trying to fix something that wasn't broken. Essentially, is what's happening with Twitter, and he's obviously got pissed off a lot of people because of that. But you know, that's neither here nor there. Rich billionaires do stupid crap all the time. But yeah, just go follow me on Twitter if you want to. You don't have to, but you can. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, first and foremost, check out my Twitch, because we stream Saturdays and Sundays, so please go check that out. But also, be sure and go and check out the videos linked in the end screen, and well, the playlist, but you get the point. It's force of habit, of course. But yeah, the top video is the top playlist is my most recent playlist, which was Magus Month. That was the most recent one of these that I've done. Whereas the bottom one is Courage Month, which was the first one that I've done, and I've done 3 of these at this point. But yeah, it's probably the one I most recommended to you, because that was the one that you know, of course, we did that. That was, of course, also a Halloween themed one. So yeah, go check that out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.